On today's show, the Phoenix Suns adding a lot of much-needed depth via free agency, including guys like Keita, Bates-Diop, and Eric Gordon. Which one of their new additions will prove to be the most important, and what does the future hold for big man Deandre Ayton? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players and they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Suns, Brendon Kleen, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Suns. And Brendon, the Phoenix Suns with a flurry of activity at the beginning of NBA free agency, adding a ton of important depth pieces moving forward and maybe a potential starter or two, depending on how things ultimately shake out with the rest of the Suns roster this offseason. Let's start right here at the top with a couple of names that should be familiar to Suns fans. Damion Lee, Josh Okogie. How important was it retaining those two guys before we get to some of the new additions that the Suns made?
I think it was big. I mean, I expected the Suns to have more guys that they retained, partially because of their weird salary situation where some of those players were the only ones they could actually pay more than the minimum to, but also just there is something to be said for continuity. They decided, screw it. But I think Lee in the regular season has proven that as a floor spacer and good decision maker, he can be on good teams and just be a guy you don't have to worry about. And Okogie had a nice season as second draft kind of low value guy to bring in and rehabilitate. He was playing in the playoffs. He had a much better season than I think anyone would have expected. So those guys make sense. And as wing players, obviously a position of need on any good team, but especially this one.
Okay, and then a flurry of other additions to this Suns team. Let's go through them rapid style. Drew Eubanks, Chimezie Metu, Keita Bates-Diop, Yuta Watanabe, and then also most recently Eric Gordon. 5 brand new names added to this Suns roster. Let's go with the most surprising of these names to you, Brendon, and then who you think is ultimately going to be the most important addition out of this crop of 5 guys.
Most surprising name, I think, was Keita Bates-Diop. Locally, there was some reporting at the last second heading into free agency that there was some momentum that he was going to come to Phoenix, and obviously that tends to mean that's just sort of done already. But prior to that, just not a player that I think was on a lot of people's radar for a great team to bring in. He was with the Spurs, had a breakout year as far as a three-point shot, just playing more minutes, got to do a little bit more defensively. Coming out of college, wasn't an amazing athlete and felt like maybe just sort of a bucket getter, but has rounded out his game on a bad team in San Antonio. The question is, can he could be a starter here. So can he do enough of that stuff at a higher level on a better team to fill in the gaps to potentially play a major role for this team? That is kind of question number one of this group that we saw come in. And most impactful, I think, has to be Eric Gordon, just simply because we've seen him do it. He was probably the most heavily pursued of this group and seemingly had several opportunities going back to Houston, going to the Warriors, staying with the Clippers, maybe even for more money than that for maybe lesser teams, and still decided to come to Phoenix, where he also may start and will definitely provide them with needed, on-ball defense and shooting and just somebody who can have the ball in their hands that you're not worried about. I think that's going to go a long way for this team, especially come playoff time.
Yeah, Eric Gordon is definitely one of the, I think, more underrated additions for any team so far throughout this free agency period. And you can ignore the Rocket stuff hanging in the background. That's just because any playoff team would be lucky to be able to add a guy like Eric Gordon, especially at the price point that they got him at, right? Just over essentially what is the veteran minimum option on year 2, all that stuff. You mentioned a couple names there, right? Talking about Keita, Bates-Diop, and EG as potential starters for this Suns team. As it stands right now, I mean, what should be the predicted or projected starting lineup right now for the Suns?
It's going to come down to whether the Suns, under new head coach Frank Vogel, see, basically, do they see Devin Booker, who is probably the best on-ball defender of the superstars, depending on how you see Kevin Durant at this point in his career. Do they see Booker as more of a guy they want guarding bigger wings, like when Boston comes to town, or who do they want guarding Jaylen Brown, basically? Or do they see Booker as the guy who is guarding guards and chasing, Ja Morant or Steph Curry around? I think that's going to be the big question, and that'll determine sort of how they handle the fifth starter, I should say. I think Bradley Beal is going to just kind of not be hidden, but guard the second or third best perimeter guy. So as far as right now, I feel like it's probably Josh Okogie. Maybe that's just my personal favoritism toward continuity, and at least just going into the season with a rebuilt roster from scratch. I kind of just favor, let's bring the guy back who was starting for us the last time we played basketball. But again, it's going to come down to, do they want more size there? Kogi would be more of that guard defender, and that would put Booker on more of the wing guys in the league. It's going to be an interesting question. It might be a little bit of a by committee. It might fluctuate throughout the season. Weird problem to have for a team that wants to compete for a championship, but they definitely gave themselves a lot of bites at the apple, a lot of options there. It's just going to be a matter of who steps up.
And that kind of going back to the continuity element too with Josh Okogie, that might play a factor as well, right? Just a guy who's already kind of played with some of these guys, knows the other guys, that kind of thing. I know there's been a lot of speculation here, especially in the aftermath of the addition of Bradley Beal moving on from Chris Paul. You've got a ton of salary committed across 4 different guys now in Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Deandre Ayton. What's your read currently on the Deandre Ayton situation? And do any of these free agency additions maybe impact what the Suns may or may not do with Ayton? Because I know that when the news was first dropping and we had the notifications on for Woj and Shams, I saw Eubanks and then I saw Chimezie Metu. And I know that neither of those guys are like legitimate big centers, but they're bigs, right? Kind of versatile a little bit. And I thought, man, maybe this is pointing towards a, Deandre Ayton move somewhere on the horizon here for the Suns.
Yeah, I actually think the Eubanks and Metu signings are 2 that I'm maybe more nervous about than the wing and guard options that the Suns brought in, just because that's just in a conference that has Nikola Jokic in it. That does worry me. So I think if the Suns were going to trade Ayton, they might still try to find some sort of rotation center in a deal. I know that Chris Haynes and others have reported, and a couple people here locally in Phoenix have reported that they're going forward as if Ayton will be a Sun. And I will take them at their word for that. But the place that I look right now, and you mentioned the signings and everything that's kind of played out as the offseason, 2 days of it have gone by, is the Mavs. Because they were the team seemingly most interested on draft night. They were offering the Suns kind of a pile of their, misfit toys back. And the Suns rightly said no to some of those offers. But if the Mavs, they've now been sitting there with their mid-level exception, haven't been able to use it. They have like 4 centers who are passable, but none that are great. If they start to look around and say, like, we didn't get maybe whatever plans A and B were after we got Kyrie Irving back, do we need something better at that spot? They might call the Suns back and say, hey, I know we thought this was over, but we really need a center. We'll give you a little more than maybe we said we would. And maybe that kind of gets things moving again. I mean, I'm willing to be ready for anything once these bigger dominoes of Harden and Lillard, we know that creates other moves that aren't expected. I could see it coming back, but I do think the Suns will benefit from having Ayton just being their defensive anchor. If it rolls into the season that way, I think they'll be happy there too.
How will the added depth pieces help out the Phoenix Suns moving forward? Is Deandre Ayton on the way out? Could he possibly become a Dallas Maverick or be headed to another location, or will he still be in the starting lineup come opening night? Of course, you'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Suns. Brendon, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thank you.